Well, thank you very much for the invitation to be here. It's a very interesting, provocative proposition. There's no doubt about that. I think the Rebellion Week, which I'm sure some of you were involved with, what I liked about it the most was that it drove some of the people that I liked the least absolutely crazy. Yeah. The right-wing media in Ireland, and there's plenty of them, we know who they are, I can list them if you wish, they have been waiting, itching for the climate movement to screw up, for somebody to throw something, a punch, whatever it is, any form of it, because there's a script that already exists, and that is the establishment knows what it's doing, and these people don't. They're wrong about the science, they're wrong about capitalism, oh, and if you shake them a bit, they're violent criminals. This is the narrative, this is the proposition that the enemies of climate action, that's what they want you to think. That the climate activists, environmentalists, call it what you wish, are fundamentally unreasonable, irrational people. And let's be honest, in the history of protest, there have been many unreasonable, irrational people. And often social change is mediated by unreasonable, irrational people, people who refuse to compromise with reality. I think Greta Thunberg is probably a classic example of an unreasonable young woman. She's not prepared to compromise. She simply calls it as we see it. But to the proposition, oh, by the way, just as a brief aside, given the title here, somebody asked me, did I think that this was really a ruse by the TCD Philosophical Society to actually present people for the special branch? And I'm sure that that's absolutely not the case in terms of, you know, the type of troublemakers that they want to have on their books. But if you are here, evening officer. So, I think some of the earlier speakers have said it already. We're in the mother, father, aunt, and uncle of crisis. There's a Chinese proverb that says, may you live in interesting times. It's really a curse. We live in interesting times. And, you know, I've reached the middle of my life, well into the middle of my life, and I consider myself extraordinarily lucky to have had the fruits of living in a secular, largely, mostly recently, a secular democracy in peacetime, with relative prosperity. These are extraordinary fruits in all of human history. To go to bed at night in a warm room, in a safe house, with a full belly. If you can do that, you've already lived better than most humans in all of human history. And many humans right now in many parts of the world. So we're an especially blessed and cursed generation. Everything that has been built up, that has this wonderful edifice, has been built on the blood of the world. The systematic, often unconscious destruction of the natural world. I started primary school in 1970. From that year to this year, 67% of all land-based vertebrate animals disappeared. That's 2/3 of all animals in the world. Now remember, 1970 was no picnic. It wasn't like there hadn't already been 150 years of industrialization and more. So I'm talking about from the benchmark of that period. Now, what that tells us is that we live in the most extraordinary times. And that really brings me to the proposition. What can we take? What can we actually say is beyond the pale, given what we face? What do we face? Some of my colleague speakers have alluded to it already, and they're not kidding. We face the death of nature, quickly followed by the extermination of this species. Now, that's the proposition, that's where we're at. Now the question is, how do we react to that? What's a fair and reasonable response? This isn't a reasonable position at all. This is a monstrous position that we find ourselves in. So how do we react? So, first of all, ecological terrorism is happening, as we know, all over the world. Some of the other speakers have alluded to it. I'll give you a couple more, if I may. Victoria Corpuz, she's the UN Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. She described persecution as follows. She said, "This is a phenomenon seen around the world. Land and environmental defenders are declared terrorists, locked up or hit with paralysing legal attacks for defending their rights or simply for living on lands that are coveted by others." For her pains, by the way, this particular UN rapporteur, who's a Filipino, has been denounced by President Duterte, her own president, as a terrorist. This is the UN Special Rapporteur. So, what we have here is the delegitimization of legitimate protest. Now, Kieran has set out beautifully the numbers for why peaceful protest works and violent protest never works. Okay? So we can accept that proposition, so my side is committed to failure. However, Cuba, 1959, the Batista regime, backed by the US. It was essentially an offshore prostitution and gambling island. Now, you can have all the peaceful protest that you like, and if you had that in 1959 or 1960 or any other year, you simply had the prisons of Cuba bursting to the seams with protesters, and many of them ending up in the bay. So, violent protest, and in that particular case, revolution, absolutely worked. The fact that America has been trying to destroy Cuba for the intervening 60 years underlines the point that it worked. And the US president at that time, he had quite a good quote, I think, that covered this. He said, "Those who make peaceful," this is John F. Kennedy, by the way, "those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable." I could spend the next 5 minutes listing off other revolutions in other parts of the world which were extremely violent. Let's take the Iranian Revolution in 1979, which again was a reversal of a revolution, if you like, from 54. But the point is, the incumbent powers in those, they had all the guns. There was no ability to go on the streets. And what bothers me, as the climate movement begins to, shall we say, flex its muscles, what we're going to be faced is severe repression. What we've seen so far is a little bit of a belly tickle from the authorities. It's all a bit of fun. We're singing some songs and people are getting arrested. But just remember, the people who have engineered this disaster are sitting on trillions of euros and dollars worth of assets. They will fight you to the death to defend their right to burn the last drop of oil and to flare off the last of the gas. They will not give that up. They will not say, "Gosh, these climate activists, they have such wonderful arguments. Shit, I'm just going to stop being a billionaire because I suck." Right? Power never concedes without a fight. I personally oppose violence strongly. I understand the position against it, but we are heading into a violent era in human history, I regret to tell you. And people on the side of the angels better be prepared to fight, because I guarantee you one thing, the folks on the other side already have their boots on. Thank you very much.